Are we live?
We are live, Joe, if you'd like to introduce.
Great. Good morning, everyone. This is Joe Kirby, the Benton County Administrator. Thanks so much for joining us today for our webinar regarding employee engagement. I think I've mentioned this to many of you as I've been throughout the organization the last couple of years, and I really became interested in employee engagement probably about 18 to 24 months ago. And the reason that I became interested in it, as all of you know, the economy was growing rapidly and had been growing rapidly for almost the better part of a decade. And when you look at the unemployment rate that was going on in the country at that time, I think here in Oregon, we were close to 3% unemployment, maybe even hovering a little less than that. Which when you look at history, historically, the unemployment rate across the country had not been this low in 50 years. So I was 5 years old the last time that the unemployment rate was this low. And you might be asking, well, why does a county administrator care about the unemployment rate? Because when the unemployment rate is low, that means that employees have many opportunities to seek employment and really to choose where they work. And as we look to Benton County and really wanting to do the best job we can about competing for employees, I became aware of the employee engagement concept. And it was really the unemployment rate that drove my interest in employee engagement. And so many of you will recall 18 to 24 months ago, I really started talking about this topic, getting more interested in it, and getting more serious from an organizational perspective about how do we ensure employee engagement. Actively engaged employees make a huge difference in terms of delivery of services and a host of other benefits that Bob will share with you today. So it's just with that background in mind that we kicked off our employee engagement initiative last September with a retreat for our management staff to introduce them to the concept. We actually used Gallup at that point, and the Gallup company did produce an employee survey for us, and we did share that employee survey. All employees, we took the responses, and departments began to actively work in smaller groups within their departments to address items that came out of the employee engagement survey. So this is just a continuation, if you will, regarding our journey regarding employee engagement. Bob Lavigna is our guest speaker today, and Bob is a nationally renowned speaker regarding public sector employees and public sector engagement. He has written a book that is a mouthful here, and I'll try and make sure I don't miss anything here. But the name of the book is Engaging Government Employees, Motivate, Inspire People to Achieve Superior Performance. And that book is now in its second printing. Bob does speak throughout the country and currently is the director for CPS HR relative to their Employee Engagement Institute. So with that brief introduction and with that brief background, I'd like Bob to go ahead and jump in. You can expect that this will last just up until 11 o'clock. And we do have or ask for active participation. As you'll see, there'll be some opportunities throughout the webinar to answer questions. So with that being said, we appreciate your involvement in our webinar today. And Bob, it's all yours.
Thanks very much, Joe. Appreciate the very nice introduction. Welcome to our session. It's great to be with you. First of all, I hope everyone, most important, is well and healthy. Now, I'm always excited, as I am today, to talk about employee engagement because I believe measuring and improving employee engagement is an enormous challenge for all organizations, but maybe particularly the public sector, and that's what we'll focus on today. And I like to start these sessions by saying that I believe the biggest challenge facing public sector organizations at all levels, and this really builds on what Joe said, is attracting, developing, engaging, and retaining talent. Because in government, and my organization is a government agency, I'll explain that in a moment, our ability to succeed depends almost entirely on the level of talent, having the right people with the right skills in the right places at the right times. We can have great policies, we can have great ideas, we can even have good technology. But if we don't have the talent to execute on those policies and ideas and manage that technology, we can't succeed. And that's really where employee engagement comes in, because improving engagement can be a powerful tool to help improve individual and organizational performance. And as Joe suggested, that's a lot of what we'll talk about today. And as we gather today in many, many different locations, public sector organizations across the nation, of course, are dealing with the impacts of COVID-19, an unprecedented challenge for public sector organizations to deliver services to the people that government serves. And we'll talk a little bit about that as well. And also including highlights from the recent survey that many of you participated in about how Benton County employees feel about this new working environment, this sort of brave new world. So a few logistical things before we get started. We do have a large number of participants, so you will be muted to avoid background noise. If, like me, you're working from home, working remotely, you can't really control background sounds. My background noise has included our grandchildren, lawnmowers, weed whackers, chainsaws, dogs, and birds. So I hope we don't have those kinds of interruptions today. But we do want this session to be as interactive as possible, as Joe said. So during the webinar, we'll be asking you to respond to questions, and they'll show up throughout the presentation. And please use the chat feature to submit your answers and feedback. I'll then read through the responses, share some of your responses. I can't go through all of them because we probably have more than 100 folks involved today. Your answers will be anonymous to the county. So we really want you to respond to the questions and do that in a candid fashion. We will share a list of the responses with the county, but without any identifying information. We'll strip out any identifying information. All we will provide will be a list of the responses to each of these questions. So your responses will be anonymous to the county. So we hope you'll respond to the questions and be candid. And I'll also be happy to answer questions, and we'll leave time at the end of the session for those questions. And if one of your questions is, does this guy usually wear a tie when he's sitting in his basement? The answer to that is no, but I did want to make a nice impression today. So let's talk a little bit about what we will cover today. We're going to cover 6 things, some background about what employee engagement is and why it matters. What is the business case for why organizations should focus on engagement? And I think to a certain extent, I'll be preaching to the converted today because, as Joe described, you have already embarked on the road to measuring and improving engagement. But I think it's also always important to emphasize why engagement matters, the business case about how engagement drives organizational performance. Then I'll share with you some results from a national survey that our organization, the Institute for Public Sector Employee Engagement, administers annually to assess the level of engagement across the entire U.S. economy, and also what drives engagement, what influences the level of engagement in the private and public sectors. Then I'll share with you our roadmap to improve engagement. And again, I think this is consistent with the way you are approaching measuring and improving engagement. Give you some examples of what public sector organizations have done after surveying their employees to improve engagement. And I always provide a caveat that there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution to improving engagement. Organizations like yours have to understand what the issues are in the workforce and then respond to those issues. But it's interesting and instructive to hear a little bit about what other organizations have done, talk about what an engagement culture is and what organizations that have achieved that culture have done to get to that stage. And then, as I mentioned, we'll share with you some of the highlights from the recently completed Employee Connection Survey, which was specifically focused on asking county employees how they're responding to the workplace changes that have resulted from the COVID-19 situation. So that's what we'll cover. A little bit about our organization, CPS HR Consulting. We're headquartered in Sacramento, but we have folks all over the country. I'm speaking to you from my home in Madison, Wisconsin. We are an independent and self-supporting government agencies. So like the organizations and the people that we work with who are public servants, we are also public servants. We do focus on HR solutions, but HR as a way to improve organizational performance. Got a lot of clients across the country, the overwhelming majority of which are state and local government organizations, mostly local government. And several years ago, we created this new organizational unit, the Institute for Public Sector Employee Engagement, and I joined CPS. I was the Assistant Vice Chancellor for Human Resources at the University of Wisconsin, retired on Friday, joined CPS on Monday to become the director of this new organizational unit specifically focused on helping public sector organizations measure and improve employee engagement. Joe mentioned my book. This is an image of the cover. This is not a commercial, but I'd like to explain why I wrote the book. My involvement with employee engagement goes back about 15 years when I was vice president of research at a nonprofit called the Partnership for Public Service in Washington, D.C., which is, its mission is to help public sector organizations, primarily the federal government, because of where it's located, measure and improve employee engagement, but also attract and retain talent. And part of my responsibilities as vice president of research was to produce the annual best places to work in the federal government ratings and rankings of around 400 federal agencies and subcomponents based on the annual federal employee engagement survey. And as I began my own education about engagement, it became clear to me that a lot had been said and written about engagement, but most of it in the private sector. And I'll share with you some of the private sector research showing clearly that high engagement companies outperform low engagement companies, but not nearly as much had been done in the public sector, particularly around the differences between operating in the public sector versus the private sector, the visibility of everything we do in government, hard to measure goals and objectives, relative inability to reward our employees financially, higher percentage of union employees, and so on. So I spent a lot of time in the book discussing those differences and the implications of those differences for how we measure and improve employee engagement in the public sector. So just a little bit of background about why I wrote the book. Some context. This is a chart, as you can see, showing the age distribution of the US workforce from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And as you can see by the height of the bars, in government, federal, state, and local, we are older on average than our private sector colleagues, a higher percentage of 50-plus employees than in the private sector. And I don't mean that pejoratively. If we had a 60-plus category, that's the one I'd be in. On the other hand of the chart, a much lower percentage of employees who are under the age of 30. So this chart has lots of implications for how we operate in the public sector. It has implications for leadership development, because this retirement tsunami that we've been hearing about for like 10 years is beginning to happen in government in large numbers. And it's going to happen in government before it happens in the private sector. It has implications for succession planning. We need to develop the next generation of leaders to replace the folks in leadership positions who are retiring. It has implications for recruiting and hiring, because we want to do a better job of attracting talented young people into government. And of course, there's implications for employee engagement, because once we bring people into government, we often spend a lot of time in the public sector, a lot of time and money hiring people. We want to make sure that we create the environment for them to feel good about the work they do, to feel like they're making a difference, and to stay with us. As Joe mentioned, his initial interest in employee engagement was around attracting and retaining talent. So a lot going on with the numbers that you see on this slide. Also, we've heard a lot about this, different generations in the workforce, and I don't like to spend too much time on this stuff because I don't like to stereotype or overgeneralize. But clearly, as many have said, this is the first time that we've had 5 generations of people in the workforce, and people in different generations. You know, I think fundamentally people are people, regardless of when they were born, but there are differences in how people process information and how they communicate that we have to be mindful of. But we don't want to go overboard. I was listening to a presentation by a young woman who was a millennial, and the title of her presentation was Talk to Millennials, not about millennials. But clearly we have to recognize that there are differences in the way people approach the world of work, depending upon what generation they're in. So to wrap this up, what does it all mean? Dramatic workforce shifts. I showed you some of the age data. I haven't showed you any of the demographic data with respect to gender, race, and ethnicity. Enormous changes going on in the workforce. It is more complicated, 5 generations in the workforce, much more diversity, different cultural perspectives, different perspectives on the world of work. And we're, because of our relative older workforce than the private sector, we're feeling this stuff first, and we have to adapt to the talent market. There are probably folks who are listening today who could remember when we had a vacancy in government, and I've been in government for about 45 years. We can post a vacancy on a bulletin board or even electronically, and we could sit back and wait for the flood of well-qualified applicants to come in. We really can't do that anymore. If we truly want to attract the best qualified people, we have to be much more aggressive and proactive. So this is the first question, and we'll see how this works. But what I want to talk a little bit about is the value of public service and why the work that we do in government, the work that you do for the county, is so important. But I want to get some feedback from you. So why did you choose to come to work for Benton County in 3 words or less? And again, all of your responses will be anonymous. So type in, if you can, in the chat box, 3 words, and then I'll share with you some of the responses. So I'll give you a minute or so to think about that and respond through the chat box. So you can all see the chat box. Okay, beginning to get some responses. Great. Again, going to be completely anonymous. We have a few. Let's see. There we go. Now they're coming in. A few more. Give you about 30 more seconds. Just had an LOL one. I'm looking off to the side because my chat box is on the left side of my screen. All right, about 15 more seconds. Hope a few more of you will. There we go. A few more. Keep them coming. So we're getting responses like service to community, fulfillment, good benefits. You know, that's always been sort of the implied contract in the public sector. Stable employment, good benefits in return for compensation, which sometimes is lower than the private sector. Dedication, retirement, stability. I needed a job. I hope it's been challenging. Enjoyable, challenging, serving people every day. Health insurance, fulfillment, service to community. I may have read that one. Make a difference. Make a difference. If we were doing a word cloud, make a difference would be the largest word. So if you have any more, please continue to include your responses. And again, we will share with the county the responses without any identifying information. So let's move ahead. Why does public service matter? I said I've been working in government and around government for about 45 years. My organization, CPS HR Consulting, is a government agency. We believe in government and the ability of government to help the people we serve improve their lives. In my own family, my mother, my brother, both daughters, and a bunch of other relatives have all been in the public sector working in government. And especially now during this pandemic, which has affected everyone in this country, government is the lifeline for many of the people that the public sector serves, including you as county employees. So when I do sessions like this, I think it's important to talk about the value of public service and the work that public servants, including all of you, do. So 12 million state and local government employees. It is the nation's largest and most diversified workforce. And if we added the federal government and teachers, it would be north of 20 million employees. And I know, again, I'm preaching to the converted because you do this work every day, but saving lives directly through fire, EMS, police, child protective services, and then also indirectly by providing other human and social services, improving the community, quality of life, clean water, parks, libraries, public works and infrastructure, public health, building safety. I think life would be pretty bleak without services like these that the government provides. And also, this is a little vaguer, but social change. Government has always been instrumental in creating economic and social equity and even preserving the environment. And I like to think, when I think of government, and I've written a lot about this, I think that government often gets the toughest jobs to do, the work that some in the private sector are unwilling or unable to do. And I know, we've outsourced a lot of our stuff in government, but still the fundamental work that government does, the services that the public sector provides to the people in their communities is unique and really makes a terrific difference in the quality of life. And here's a quote that I really like, and I know you can read it, but I'll read it to you anyway. It's from this woman, Tracy Miller, regional director for this organization called the Alliance for Innovation. Smart, compassionate, loyal, ethical, committed. These are the adjectives I use to describe the local government professionals. So this is very specific to local government. You do not have to wonder as a citizen if you will have clean water to your home, or street lights that operate, or an ambulance when you dial 911. These have become givens in our lives, and it's largely due to the stewards of our public dollars who balance the needs of the people they serve. So I hope that everyone in government, especially as we deal with this crisis, and as the people who depend on us even more, feel good about the work that they do. And I will return to that in a moment. Okay, so what is employee engagement? Well, I'm going to do a little background. I'll provide you with a definition that we use that is pretty consistent with the definition that's in the literature. But again, we want to get some feedback from you. So we have a question here. How would you describe employee engagement? Again, in 3 words or less, please use your chat box. And I, again, will highlight some of the responses that we receive. But, based on your own experience, your own commitment, the people you work with, what does employee engagement mean to you? Okay, good. We're getting some responses. Maybe another 30 seconds. All right, keep them coming, but I'll start reading some of them. Being heard. I'm reading them, that's why I'm looking off to my left or my right, depending on what you're seeing. Employee buy-in, participation, action when a call to action is made, listening, evaluating, improving, affinity group support, getting work done, pretty basic stuff, to be heard, sharing proactive ideas, providing feedback. Engagement is sometimes difficult because of the workload. Connection, listening, unity, equality. So let me share with you our definition. I think it incorporates what we heard. It's really about that connection between the work that the employee does and the mission of the organization. And engaged employees are proud of what they do. They feel good about the organization. They believe that the organization values them. And in return, they're willing to deliver what is known in the research as discretionary effort, which is kind of a fancy researchy word that simply means they're willing to do whatever it takes to help the organization succeed. So I think that's consistent with some of what we just heard. For example, sharing proactive ideas. Engaged employees are proactive about making recommendations, suggestions, wanting the organization to succeed. And it really goes above and beyond job satisfaction. Employees can be satisfied because their compensation is fair, benefits are good, and we want them to feel good about those things. Their workloads are reasonable. We want people to feel good about that. But we want them to go above and beyond satisfaction and have that personal connection. So we consider satisfaction to be necessary, but not sufficient for employee engagement. So what does engagement look like? How do engaged employees demonstrate that they're engaged? And again, this is consistent with what many of you just shared with us. Volunteering ideas, going the extra mile for customers, being proactive, providing feedback. They work hard and they work smart. They'll stay with the organization. Research shows even if they have opportunities to make more money elsewhere, of course, there might be a limit on how much they're willing to sacrifice. And I like to talk about this recommend organization as a good place to work. Engaged employees say good things about where they work. They say good things about the organization, its mission, their colleagues. And that's important because we want our folks, people like you, to be sort of unofficial recruiters. Recommending, suggesting, urging other people to consider public service careers. And also to be making sure that people in their networks, in their communities, understand the positive things that government does for them, to push back on what is too often criticism of government. And of course, at kind of a real basic level, they show up for work. And I'll share with you some data about that. And they're productive. They get things done. So here's from Dilbert. We need more what the management experts call employee engagement, according to the boss. I don't know the details. Something to do with the idiots working harder for the same pay. Anything different on your end? Dilbert says, I think I'm supposed to be happier, says the boss. So as Dilbert often shows us, this is the way not to handle employee engagement. So why does it matter? What's the business case? Decades of research in both the public and private sectors have shown that improving employee engagement can improve organizational performance. And I'm going to share with you sort of the tip of the iceberg about showing some of that research in the private and public sector. But the point is, employee engagement, it isn't another touchy-feely thing. It isn't just another HR thing, and I don't mean that pejoratively. I'm in the HR business myself. It's not about making sure employees are happy all the time. We want our employees to be happy most of the time. It is about organizational performance. But before I show you some numbers, I want to show you a picture. And this is an actual photo, not taken in Benton County, as far as I know. And you might describe this work product, and I use that term advisedly, as being performed by someone who is actively disengaged. In other words, comes to work every day and tries to undo all the good work that their colleagues are trying to do. So I show this photo a lot. And I was showing it one day to a client of ours, a large city. And in the room were department directors, including the Department of Public Works director. And I told him that this photo was not taken in his jurisdiction. And he's a nice guy. And he kind of laughed. And he said, you think this is bad? He said, I've seen it where it's not a branch in the road, where it's a car. And they work their way all the way around the car. And I said, wow. I said, do you have a picture of that? And he said, absolutely not. And I have a calendar someone gave to me. Each day in the year, 365 days, has a photo like this. So this is an article I wrote, cover for this publication a couple of years ago, and I entitled it The Science of Engagement, because I was doing a presentation like this, only it was in person. And a county administrator came up to me afterwards. He said, I've heard a lot about employee engagement, but I never realized that there's a science around engagement. And I was struck by that. And that's why I entitled this article the way I did. And it's not a science like chemistry or biology or physics, but it's a science in the sense that there is a growing body of knowledge, empirical research showing the impact of employee engagement. This is from Gallup. I know you know Gallup because they did your survey. And Gallup has summarized millions of responses to the Q12 survey. And what you see here is Gallup's analysis comparing results, key performance indicators, between the top quartile and the bottom quartile work groups in its database, primarily private sector. So the top 25% to the bottom 25% in terms of employee engagement. So high engagement companies, more profitable, more productive, better customer satisfaction, much less turnover. In fact, that's the biggest single difference, 65%. And in government, we're typically low turnover organizations. And as you look at these results, keep in mind, we're comparing the top and bottom 25%. If we were comparing the top 10%, top 5%, top 1%, these differences would be even more dramatic. Wall Street Journal, about a year and a half ago, reported on results of research, again in the private sector, analysis of business outcomes for 693 large multinational companies, and found, you can read the headline, company's performance depends first of all on its people. Biggest jumps were companies with big gains in employee engagement and development. Not research and development, not marketing, not any of the other stuff, employee engagement and development. So a lot of private sector research, but we also have research from the public sector. Here's the federal government. We have a lot of data from the federal government because of best places to work in the federal government, which has been produced since 2003. Here are some results comparing high engagement federal agencies with low engagement agencies. Almost twice as successful in achieving their strategic goals, fewer average sick leave days, fewer average EEO complaints, and even less lost time due to on-the-job injuries. So pretty dramatic results from the federal government. State and local government, this is from our own research, our annual survey, national poll, private and public sector. Here we've combined responses from state and local government, responses to 3 of our statements in our survey. I can contribute to quality, cost savings, and customer service. And you see the fully engaged, the green bar, almost twice as likely to agree with the statements. I can contribute to quality, cost savings, and customer service. And of course, we want our people to believe that they can influence these kinds of outcomes. A little more from our survey. We asked this question: my organization is successful at achieving its mission. And here you see, broken down by level of government, percentage of employees who responded positively to this statement, fully engaged compared to not engaged or somewhat engaged. So you see on the right side, local government employees, and these are nationally representative data, local government employees from across the country, are more than 3 times more likely to agree that their organization is successfully achieving its mission than not engaged or somewhat engaged. And oh, by the way, we will be providing you with access to this deck. So I know there's a lot of data in here, a lot of content, so you'll have an opportunity to look at it at your leisure as well. So there's also a lot of research around how engagement affects people's personal lives. You know, what happens to us at work, for many of us, it influences how we feel at home and how we feel overall. So here is the question: how satisfied are you with your life? And it's a different scale, 1 to 10. So the difference in the heights of the bars are not as dramatic, but these are still statistically significant differences. Fully engaged employees are more satisfied overall with their lives in general than employees who are not engaged or somewhat engaged. So really dramatic impacts, not just on organizational performance, but about how people feel about their lives. And it's often about leadership. And I know that in your Gallup results, there were some questions about supervision and leadership. This is also from Gallup. Percentage of employees answering yes to the question: if you could fire your current boss, would you do so or not? 51% of the actively disengaged, people who painted around that branch in the road, think it's all about their boss. If they could just get rid of their boss, their lives would be a lot better. Many of us maybe in our work lives have had this experience. I hope not so right now, compared to only 6% of the engaged. And this goes to an important point, which I'll return to later, which title of this slide, it's often about leadership. So in the public sector, we roll up all of this research into what we describe as the employee engagement value chain. So improved engagement drives better performance, organizational performance. That drives higher stakeholder, that's a typo by me, should be STEAK, holder satisfaction, people we serve, residents, citizens. That leads to more trust in government by the people we serve. And if public servants believe that the people we serve trust us, we're also likely to have a higher level of engagement. So it is a virtuous cycle. I want to give you a pretty dramatic example. When I worked for the partnership, we had a relationship with Gallup. We asked Gallup to do a telephone poll for us, because that's a lot of what Gallup does. And Gallup asked the folks who answered the phone to think about their most recent interaction with someone in government, the public sector, and to rate that interaction, a single interaction. And what Gallup found is when the folks, who responded to the question had a positive reaction to that single exchange, they were 3 times more likely to feel good about government overall. That's a powerful finding, because that means that individual public servants can move the needle of public satisfaction with government one interaction at a time. Of course, they have to know their stuff, they have to get good customer service. In other words, they have to be engaged. So a lot of research, decades, and I've tried to show you the tip of the iceberg. In the public and private sector, high level of engagement translates into superior organizational performance and customer satisfaction. So our national poll, I wanted to share with you some of the results. We do this poll annually, and here's all the background on the survey. 2,000 respondents, variety of occupations. We make sure that our respondents match the U.S. population with respect to things like public and private sector, gender, race, and ethnicity. Statistically reliable results. Let me ask you another question. I'm going to share with you in a moment the results of our survey, and these again are nationally representative data showing you the percentage of employees in the public and private sectors who are fully engaged, somewhat engaged, and not engaged. So what percentage of employees in government overall, federal, state, and local combined, do you think are fully engaged on a scale of 0 to 100%? And then I will show you what our results reveal. So I'll give you a few seconds. 0 to 100%, what percentage of employees in government do you think are fully engaged? Okay, results are coming in. A lot of variability. Ooh. Okay, about 15 more seconds. I'll write down the lowest and the highest. Okay, so estimates are a low of 10%, all the way up to a high of 100%. So I admire that person's optimism. So what do the results show? How engaged is the U.S. workforce? Share with you across all sectors, private, government overall, and then we break it down by level of government. So the green are fully engaged, that's what I asked you about. That yellowish is somewhat engaged and the red is not engaged. So you see overall government, 35% fully engaged. So when we did have someone who, let's see, 35%, that's right, someone got it right on the button. So you can see the comparison to the private sector. Local government is 37%. So across the board in government, lower than the private sector for fully engaged, but higher not engaged. So 29% in the federal government, almost a third, local government 22%, And I know the Gallup results, and different ways to measure these things, but fairly consistent. Gallup results showed that county employees, 40% are engaged. So, pretty consistent with our results, but higher. So you are higher than our government overall and the local government, and you're right on par with the private sector. Again, keeping in mind that there are different ways to measure these things. So thanks very much for responding. So I'm going to ask you again, and I hope you'll continue to respond. We're going to talk a little bit about what we have found are the key drivers of engagement in government. In other words, and in the private sector for that matter. In other words, what are the most important influences on people's levels of engagement? So I want you to think of an experience as you've had. It could be at work, could be personally, in a nonprofit, even at home, where there was a high level of engagement, thinking about what we described or defined as engagement, as well as your own perspective on engagement, that commitment, that connection, and what created the engagement. What was it, in 3 words or less, that created that engagement? And then I'm going to, again, read to you some of the responses. Good. Thanks very much for responding. We're getting a lot of them. Got 15 more seconds. Okay, so pride, consistent with what we talked about. My bosses, leadership, supervision, trust, where people feel heard, feel valued, teamwork, pride, service. Thank you for giving us the 3 words. We care, good leadership, everyone coming up with an idea together, supervisors who care and listen, that pattern supervision, leadership, reaction to crisis, presumably a positive reaction, serving, community, trust of managers. So I'm going to share with you now what we have found. We do regression analysis across all of our 2,000 responses to identify what the most important drivers or influences are on engagement. We break it down by sector. So this is in government. And you can see there's a lot of consistency here, right? Leadership and managing change, which is consistent with what many of you just shared. The number 1 driver across all levels of government, including in the private sector. My work, federal and state government, training and development, federal, state. The only real difference, interestingly, is in local government. Leadership and managing change, that is consistent, but my supervisor is the number 2, and these are in order, the number 2 driver of engagement in local government, training and development. So leadership and managing change, leaders who are visible, leaders who live and exemplify the values of the organization, leaders who are good communicators, leaders who manage change well, and leaders who implement changes that are viewed as positive. Training and development, conversations about my career, opportunities to develop my career, not just formal training, but also other opportunities. I've had an experience, a developmental experience in the last year that has helped me build my competencies. And I do another webinar where I talk about how to maintain engagement during the pandemic. And one of the points I make is we can't forget training and development. Even though it might be easy to kind of overlook that as we all scramble to get our work done, we got to keep our eyes and minds focused on developing our employees. And my work, I feel challenged. I feel like I'm making a difference. And my supervisor in local government, we have a good relationship. My supervisor is clear about my expectations. My supervisor provides feedback. My supervisor provides recognition. Some of the same issues that came up in your Gallup results. So those are the workplace drivers. We also look at cultural drivers separately because culture is such an important influence on organizational performance. And across all sectors, private and public and all levels of government, appreciation and recognition, the number 1 key cultural driver of engagement. People want to feel appreciated They want to be recognized. 64% of people who leave their jobs identify lack of recognition as one of the reasons they leave, that they have left their job. And again, when I talk about maintaining engagement during a pandemic, we have to continue to acknowledge and recognize our employees. We may not be able to walk down the hallway and thank them, but we have to find other ways to recognize. And I was on a call with a group of people, and one of the folks, a manager, recognized one of the other people on the call for a contribution they've made, and I swear you can almost hear that person smiling. It was so meaningful to get that kind of recognition. Also want to work in places that are innovative, that are fair and inclusive. So again, this is across the entire U.S. economy. Look at individual organizations, you're going to see some differences. So this is our roadmap, and this is very consistent with the approach that I believe you are taking. And I like to show this to make an important point, which is surveying employees is important to understand how our employees are feeling about the organization, its mission, the culture, their leadership, their supervisor, resources and tools and so forth. But you have to act on the results. You have to share the results, you have to take action, and then you have to sustain engagement over the long term. Organizations that survey employees and then don't do anything with the results are going to be worse off than if they had not surveyed their employees. And I know that is the path you are on, but I always like to share this roadmap and emphasize that one point. So here's a poll question, following up on the point that I just made. Give some feedback to leadership, and we'll show you the results. The poll question is, Benton County has taken action on the employee engagement survey results, the results that you developed last fall. And Julie, I'm going to turn it over to you to manage this process and then share the results.
Okay, thank you, Bob. So we have this poll question open. Simply select the one answer that you most identify with. We will leave this open until we see that pretty much everyone has responded, or most. And seeing some answers come in, that poll panel will be on the right side of your screen. So we will go ahead and leave this open for, maybe another 20 seconds, and then we'll go ahead and close it and share the results. Yeah, so keep your answers coming in.
And I can hear my grandchildren in the background. They're staying with us this week. I hope you can.
Well, we're not hearing the grandkids.
Okay, good. No weed whackers, no lawnmowers.
Not that either.
Okay, good.
Just seeing some answers coming in. And okay, so it looks like that has pretty much slowed down. We'll give it just another few seconds, and then I'm going to go ahead and close it up and share those results. So far, I'm seeing two answers that are pretty neck and neck.
Okay.
And okay, so I'm going to go ahead and close this poll.
Julie,
I am doing my best. So I'll close this poll now, and then we will share those results. Well, okay, actually, in another 15 seconds, it will close.
Okay, we can wait.
Care to venture a guess at which two answers came in the lead?
I do not.
Okay, so let's share these results. And okay, can you see those results?
I can see the raw numbers. Let me move it over. The sense there as well.
Yeah, so what I am seeing is that the absolute highest number was agree, but very close. Behind that was neither agree nor disagree.
Okay.
Next up was disagree, and that came in at about half of the responses from neither agree or disagree. And a few people said strongly agree, and a few people did not know or chose not to answer. So with that, we will go ahead and close this up, and back to you, Bob.
It looks like about half of the folks who responded neck and neck, neither agree nor disagree or agree. That's summarizing. Okay. And then someone said, I had to escape from full screen to access the poll and see the results. Could you let everyone know? So I hope you can still see. I'm still in the deck. Okay, so thanks for that. Now I'm going to share with you some examples, as I mentioned earlier, of what public sector organizations have done after they have measured engagement through a survey to achieve high levels of engagement. And again, I want to qualify this by saying there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution. And sometimes I ask participants to guess how many public sector organizations there are across the U.S. Obviously, there are 50 states and District of Columbia, but counties, cities, townships, special districts, villages, and I won't do that today, but the answer is 90,000. And I think that's also from the federal government. So not any single thing is going to work in 90,000 organizations, different cultures, different budget situations, different political situations, different levels of service, et cetera. So it really has to be, the actions have to be focused on your data. And I know you have the Gallup data, but it is interesting to understand what other public sector organizations have done to improve engagement. So I'm going to kind of quickly go through some of the highlights, and I think you'll find that these actions are consistent with a lot of the feedback that you have already given us, including, I'm going to go right, leadership. I'll talk a little bit about leadership as a key driver, and you identified that as what you found in your own experiences was key, but strategy. So organizations have made measuring and improving engagement a strategic priority, not something that we do when the rest of our work is done, not just an HR program, but something that is fundamental to what we are trying to achieve in this organization, part of our value system. I'll give you some examples of that. Leadership, mentioned the number one driver that we have found when we've done our annual national poll, best places to work in the federal government. Every year since 2003, when best places have been produced, leadership has been the number one driver across the entire federal government and in almost every federal agency. And in our work, we have done surveys in dozens of organizations, public sector across the country, border to border, coast to coast. Leadership is almost always one of the key drivers. So let me give you some examples. Strategies. This is from the Napa Sanitation District. One of its strategic goals, maintaining dynamic and skilled workforce through employee engagement. So this isn't an HR strategic goal. This is the entire district, making it very explicit that the way that they are going to achieve success is through a dynamic and skilled workforce that is engaged. One example, a little closer to home, City of Beaverton, from its 2019-20 action plan, strategic plan, holistic approach to employee engagement throughout the employee life cycle. So engagement is involved in everything we do with our employees, from when we recruit and hire all the way through their experience with us until the time they leave the city. And they've done an employee engagement survey and are going to do next survey. They've established a baseline, and now they're going to see if the needle of engagement is moving in the right direction. So I'm going to back up a moment. And I can give you more examples. State government, local government, federal government, where organizations have made an explicit commitment very publicly, very visibly, that we're going to focus on employee engagement because we know that is the way that we can deliver service. And I'll give you a case study here that combines strategy and leadership. It's from the federal government, but I think it's also relevant. And it's from the Federal Labor Relations Authority. And when I was at the Partnership for Public Service and was producing the annual Best Places to Work in the federal government, one year when we produced the results, we always analyze the level of engagement on a scale of 0 to 100%, much as we did earlier. And we calculated the engagement level for this agency, FLRA, it was 18%. Now, the next lowest was around 55%. So I called the HR director for the Federal Labor Relations Authority up and I said, please tell me that we made a mistake. We miscalculated. It can't possibly be that bad. And she said, nope, you got it right. This place is a mess. So 18%. Next year, it went all the way up from 18% to 19.5%. And then in 2010, I think it was, a new leader came in. And she realized that the place was a mess, as the HR director had told me, and she needed to focus on the workforce and employee engagement. So I'm going to show you what happened. This is a chart showing the best places score for the FLRA, as well as that gray line is the small agency. So interestingly, when we designed this chart, we never even thought that an organization would have a lower score than 25%. So the FLRA score, when it was 18, it actually disappears from the chart. So 2010, new director comes in. Like I said, she realizes that the organization is a mess. And in order to improve performance, she needs to focus on the workforce and employee engagement. And I'll show you in a moment what she did. But here are the results, that blue line. 29 to 2010 went from 19.5, you can't even see it, to almost 75. Then it went over 75 and peaked in 2015 at around 85%, became the #1 small agency in the entire federal government. I don't have it updated, but what I will tell you is the percentage has declined because of new leadership. So what did this person, this leader, do? She did a whole bunch of stuff. And I'm not going to read these things to you because you can read them, but it was about leadership and it was about strategy. She identified 2010 as the year of the employee, and the COO who I spoke to told me that every year since then has been also the year of the employee. She included employee engagement as part of the strategic vision of the organization. She did a listening tour. She traveled around the country to all of the locations of the FLRA around the country to listen to her employees, to understand not just what they said in the survey, but why they said what they said. And she involved people in making key decisions, including around things like the budget. And the result is the percentage of, or the employee engagement index improved dramatically. And so did results. This is an organization that handles labor disputes across the entire federal government. And these are some of the results. Reduced pending cases by 90% as employee engagement went up. So did performance. Eliminated all overage cases and reduced the average time to close cases from 250 to 50 days. A dramatic improvement. And there are other examples. Patent and Trademark Office was ranked 167 in best places to work. New director came in, did a lot of the same things that the FLRA did, only it's a little more challenging because Patent and Trademark Office has always been, or at least in the last 15 or 20 years, a remote workforce. If you're reviewing patent applications, you can do it from anywhere in the country. And you might never actually show up or be at PTO headquarters in Alexandria, Virginia. So that is an interesting challenge. New director came in, took a lot of actions with respect to improving the workforce, the workplace, and went from 176 also to #1 in her category in terms of size of the organization. So strategy and leadership can make a tremendous difference. That our research has shown, Partnership for Public Service, and I think that's consistent with Gallup's result as well. So kind of an interesting case study, I think. So another thing that is very important that sometimes gets overlooked, and that is onboarding. Making sure that when the new employee is ready for the job, the job is ready for the new employee. You know, you only get one chance at a first impression, and you have to do it right. And there's been a lot of research showing that organizations that do a good job of onboarding their new employees, in other words, giving our new employees the tools, the resources, the support, and the information they need, have better retention, faster time to productivity, and better engagement. And this is a model that we first developed at the partnership. I rolled it out at the University of Wisconsin. We've also used it with some of our clients. And the idea here is that onboarding is defined as an integrated set of activities for the new employee that begins before the employee reports to work. So as soon as that employee has an accepted job offer, that's when onboarding begins, and it extends throughout that new employee's entire first year. And what we've done here is divide the process into 5 phases. It could be 3, it could be 7. And we've identified some examples of activities that should occur during each of these phases. The full list is a lot more comprehensive than this. These are just some examples. But the idea is, onboarding is not just orientation. Onboarding includes orientation, but it covers a lot more than that. And while many of the onboarding activities do involve HR, it's not just HR. A lot of the onboarding activities are really around making sure that the new employee makes a good connection with their supervisor right from the start and consistently through that first year. And an interesting anecdote, Quicken Loans, the CEO of Quicken Loans, who many of us have seen doing ads, TV ads, he spent an entire day with every new group of hires, Quicken Loans, because he wants them to hear directly from him about the organizational culture. He has there's a lawnmower. He has something he calls a group of isms that he wants new employees to hear directly from him. So if the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar corporation like Quicken Loans can spend a full day with new employees, then I think a lot of us can as well. And one of the things we like about onboarding is it doesn't take a lot of money to do a good job of onboarding, to make sure that we provide new employees with the information, the resources, and the support they need to succeed. Now, you can spend money on onboarding. You can buy software that helps you manage the process and integrate all of the moving parts, but it doesn't take a lot of money to make sure that, as I said earlier, when the new employee is ready for the job is ready for the new employee. And here is a guide that I actually wrote it, so I'm going to take that into consideration, but I did it for the National Public Management Association for HR, IPMA HR, that goes into great detail. It's described as a definitive guide for onboarding new public sector employees. I think this thing costs like $15 from IPMA, but goes through in a lot of detail the model that I just showed you and a checklist of activities that we suggest should be conducted in each phase of that onboarding process. So sometimes small things can mean a lot, and when we look at onboarding, that's what we see. And sometimes when I do these sessions, I get some feedback. People say, Bob, you know, I wanted you to tell me what I can do to improve engagement when I go back to work tomorrow. And I wish I knew the answer to that question. I wish I knew some holistic answer that's going to work in every single organization. But like I said earlier, you really have to understand your own workforce and then take action based on the issues in your workforce. But if you're looking for some low-hanging fruit, we think onboarding is something that you should really take a look at. Also, supervision. This goes to many of the comments that all of you made about what influence levels of engagement in your own experiences. There was research done in the federal government to try to figure out what the key differentiators are between high engagement federal agencies and low engagement federal agencies. And what the research found was that managing performance was the single biggest differentiator between these high engagement agencies and the low engagement agencies. But what does that mean? It means that the managers and supervisors in these high engagement agencies did these things more and better than the managers and supervisors in the low engagement agencies, linking expectations to mission. And I know that was one of the questions in the survey, in the Gallup survey, and it was also fairly high scoring. So obviously you are doing the right things. Meeting regularly with employees, opportunities to grow and develop, semi-annual discussions, and holding employees accountable, dealing with poor performance. And we know in the public sector, I said I've spent 45 years in government. I've worked in organizations with strong civil service rules. I was in charge of the Wisconsin Civil Service System for 10 years. We had unions at that time, so I know it is not always easy to hold employees accountable and deal with poor performers. That's why the onboarding process is so important, because onboarding is an opportunity for the organization to see if the new employee is the right fit, and also for the employee to see if it's the right fit. Someone once told me that there are no poor performers, there are only poor job fits. And I don't believe that 100%, but I think it has a lot of truth to it. So holding employees accountable and dealing with poor performance. So the single biggest differentiator between the high engagement agencies and the low engagement agencies is what you see here: managing performance effectively. And HR can create the systems and the processes and the policies for this stuff. But at the end of the day, it comes down to the relationship between the manager, the supervisor, and the folks who report to those managers and supervisors. To build on that a little bit, management and supervision, making sure we put people into supervisory positions because they can be good leaders and can build engagement. There's an example that I cite in the book. I think it's a pretty interesting one. It's actually from the United Kingdom, a public sector agency, that when it is interviewing candidates for management positions, it gives the candidates a set of employee engagement survey results and asks the candidates right on the spot, real time, to look at the results and describe how they, as the leader of that organization, would respond to those results. And in the back of the room are employees in that organizational unit who can hear what the candidates have to say. So I think that was pretty interesting. Develop competencies around engagement. We want our folks, our leaders, to be good at building and maintaining high engagement organizations. We need to be able to articulate and tell them what that means. What do they have to do to be successful and build high engagement organizations? Provide them the support that they need and hold leaders accountable for engagement. We always suggest and really work with our clients to drill down to the lowest possible organizational work units with the employee engagement survey results, because that's where the action largely should occur, and that's where the accountability should be as well. And there are private sector organizations that hold leaders accountable for engagement to the extent that they actually link compensation decisions to employee engagement survey results for departments and divisions. And don't quote me on that, because I think that's a slippery slope, but it shows you just how seriously these organizations take engagement. And there's one large company, I won't name it, that if you're in the succession pipeline and your organizational unit has a consistently low level of engagement, you are no longer in that pipeline. Again, just to show you how important private sector companies consider employee engagement. So making sure that our managers and supervisors have the tools they need and the support to be successful and build and maintain high levels of engagement. So what else? Hire people, bring them into the organization because you believe they can help you maintain engagement. Patent and Trademark Office, which I mentioned to you earlier, went from 176 to #1 in its category, explicitly includes in its assessment and evaluation process, and there are tools to do that, assessing the extent to which a new employee can contribute to a culture of engagement. They want to bring people in right from the start who can help them maintain that high level of engagement. Plan for succession. I mentioned this earlier when we talked about the age demographics in the public sector, how we're older on average. We need to plan for the next generation of leaders. And oftentimes in government, we hear, well, we can't do succession planning. We can't pre-select people. We have civil service rules. We have union rules. We can't do it like they do in the private sector, where they designate somebody and they say, you're going to take this job in 2 years, and we're going to spend the next 2 years preparing you. Agreed, we can't do that, but we can create leadership development programs, people competitively selected, to help people build the competencies that they need to be leaders, and then draw from that group competitively to move people into leadership positions. So it is possible to do succession planning in the public sector. Appreciate and recognize the #1 cultural driver of engagement in both the private and public sectors. I mentioned earlier, 64% of people who leave their jobs identify lack of appreciation as one of the reasons they left the organization. So on a one-to-one basis, sometimes it just means telling our employees, I mentioned that conference call before, telling our employees that we appreciate the work that they do, as well as doing enterprise-wide recognition programs. Communicate and listen. Someone earlier in the feedback said that what influenced the level of engagement in the experience that they had is people's opinion counted. So communicate. There are ways that we can do this on an organizational-wide level using crowdsourcing, social media, organizations that encourage their employees to provide recommendations or suggestions electronically. They share those with the rest of the organization. People get a chance to vote on those suggestions. And if a suggestion gets a certain number of votes, then it goes to senior leadership for consideration and implementation. When I was at the University of Wisconsin, we did 3 campus-wide employee engagement surveys. And one of the things our employees told us, especially our frontline employees, our blue-collar employees, our second and third shift employees, is they didn't really know what was going on in the organization. No one was communicating to them. So we began to have quarterly HR forums. We do one in the daytime, and we do one from 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. at night. We call them the midnight sessions for our second and third shift folks. And as we began to do these things, the midnight sessions were better attended than the daytime sessions because these people were hungry. They were desperate, not just to get information, but also to have the opportunity to be heard, as one of you mentioned earlier, and to believe that their opinion counted. And we got our chancellor, the CEO, to show up at one of these midnight sessions. And someone described it as historic, that it was the first time most of the people in that room had ever seen the chancellor in person. And they treated her like a rock star. They took selfies with her. It was really very endearing. And the university began to do that, not just for HR issues, but any time that they needed to communicate with the organization, to reach out to the second and third shift folks, oftentimes invisible employees to many of the faculty and academic staff, but to make sure that we could communicate with them and their opinion counted. Respect work-life balance. And we are certainly in that situation right now. People working at home. I used to say we want to give people an opportunity to come to work and make a difference and go home and have a personal life. But now work-life balance, where does work end and where does a personal life begin? It's really a big challenge. And I want to read you a quote from an article I wrote. This is from a government leader who said, as a result of COVID-19, we've had to drastically change. People who have kids need to take an hour off to put someone down for a nap or to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. So we are in an entirely different environment now. And in a moment, I'll share with you the results that you have shared with us for the Employee Connection Survey. And we have to understand what this leader said. We are in a whole different work environment now. And when we did the surveys at the university, our employees, many of them said, I know I can't work at home. I know I'm essential. I have to show up for work, just like many of your employees do. Police, fire, the university, large university like that, and I know Oregon State is where you are. It's like a little city. Public works, police, buildings, food service, people have to come to work. So these folks said, I know I can't work remotely, at least not all the time. I just want my supervisor to know that there are some times I can't be at work. I have personal stuff going on. I have medical stuff going on. I have family stuff going on. They need to understand and be sensitive to that. And our supervisors said, well, you know, if I do it for one person, I have to do it for another. And we said, yes, you're right, you do. But you will build productivity, you will build performance, and you will build loyalty. So in this unprecedented workplace environment that we're in right now, this is, I think, raised work-life balance to, again, to use the word, to an unprecedented level. And then connect work to mission. Make sure, as I defined earlier, because engagement is often about that connection between the work I do and the mission and what the organization does, to connect the dots, the line of sight between the work I do and the mission of the organization. I'm going to show you an example of that in a moment. So here's an example about recognition. This is from the University of Wisconsin Hospital, a supervisor's toolkit, which included these examples: recognition without spending a dime. It's not always about money, right? You can read these things, and while we may have to adapt them to the current work environment, the COVID-19 work environment, we can't maybe post something on a department bulletin board, we can still interact with our people to recognize them. And, you know, there are informal ways to do that also. Thank you notes, birthday cards, anniversary cards, sometimes little things can mean a lot. But there are many ways to recognize employees, even if we can't do it financially. And I really like this next anecdote. This is from National Aeronautics and Space Administration, which is pretty timely, right? We have, for the first time in a long time, we have astronauts in space. This is a story about a group of reporters who were at NASA headquarters many years ago. They're walking down the hallway, and they came across a custodian. And they asked this guy, they said, what is it you do here at NASA? I don't know why they asked him the question, but they did. And his answer was, I help send men to the moon. At the time it was men. So wouldn't it be great if everyone in our organizations had the same kind of connection between the work they do and the mission of the organization as this custodian at NASA did? So I'm going to ask you to think about this question. Again, please provide us with feedback. Again, we will provide a list to the county, but it won't have anybody's name or identifying information based on, you know, maybe some of the things that I just described, but more so on your own experience. What is one thing, just one, that the county can do to improve employee engagement? And we will share this, again, without any names, not any attribution, anonymously to the county as feedback. So again, we'll give you a minute or so to think about that and share with us your suggestion. Okay, here we go. Maybe 45 seconds, a few more. Again, this is all private, no attribution, completely anonymous will be the feedback we provide. Maybe 30 seconds. Interestingly, pardon me, some of the questions are relating to the current work environment. Okay, 15 seconds. Couple more. So what I'm seeing, a lot of it is kind of cultural, maybe some leadership issues, recognition. We sure talked about that. Be more genuine Listen to those on the ground floor who are doing the actual work. I think that goes to the anecdote I gave you about our second, third shift folks at the university. Care about employees, not just talk about it. Walk the walk, right? Create fewer barriers for change. That's one of the important leadership competencies, managing change. Create and support affinity groups. This came up earlier. Groups for employees to come together and share common interests or experiences. And, you know, they could be demographic affinity groups. They could be around experiences or interested. Better hiring practices. Probably want to dig into that a little bit. And this is an interesting one. Bring supervisors back in person in the office whenever possible. And another one about affinity groups around language. Bringing people together, I think, who share a common language to share their perspectives and their experiences. So good suggestions. Again, we will share them, but only the suggestions, not any identifying information. So moving along. I want to talk a little bit, we're getting towards the end of the presentation, and this is towards the end, but certainly not least. We talked about part of our model is to sustain engagement over the long term. And that really means creating a culture of engagement. When I was at the university, we were involved, as you can see, with the conference board, put together a consortium of public and private sector organizations that were focused on employee engagement. Some big companies, GM, Alcoa, Quicken Loans was there. Some public sector organizations, a couple of federal agencies. We were the only, at that time, higher education organization. And each year, this consortium does research on an employee engagement issue. And the first year, it was around what you see here, an engagement culture. So first we defined it. You see the definition there. Things that promote increasing levels of engagement as a cultural norm, the way we do business, how we interact with each other, how we interact with our clients and customers. So we said, okay, pretty good definition, but what does it really mean? What have organizations that have achieved this, and who are they, and how have they done it? So we looked at all these best places to work with. Best place to work in the federal government, great places to work, which is private sector, great colleges to work for. Gallup has a list. We surveyed them and we interviewed them to try to find out what's the secret sauce. What are you doing to be at the top of all of these lists? And this is what we learned. These are the characteristics of these organizations. Everybody gets the business case. They see how engagement is linked to the mission, critical business outcomes. Leaders and managers are committed to it, work together. It's not just an HR program. They measure it regularly, and then they explicitly take action and then communicate the actions. They're very transparent. They try to hire, train, evaluate, advance, even pay employees based on how they contribute to employee engagement. And they have a strong communication strategy, especially by leaders. One of the folks I spoke to was a leader in one of these organizations. She said, when it comes to employee engagement, we talk about it all the time. Not something we do when the rest of our work is done. It's now not at the bottom of a meeting agenda. If we get to it, we get to it. If we don't, that's okay too. We talk about it all the time. So these are the characteristics of these organizations at the top of these best places lists that have met that definition of an engagement culture and how they have done it. And I'll give you another anecdote later on as I try to wrap up. So we've talked about what engagement is, why it matters, the business case, the importance of measuring engagement. I shared with you some of the results from our national survey, compared those results to your results. Your level of engagement in the county is above our public sector benchmarks and equal to the private sector. Many of our clients are not at that level, so you should feel good about that. Some examples of what public sector organizations that have measured engagement have done to improve it. And we also got some feedback from you along the way. Now I want to give you some highlights of the survey that many of you recently completed. You can see here 214 employees responded. This is a survey that our organization made available nationally to any public sector organization at no charge that wanted to kind of take the temperature of their employees during this new work environment, this new world order that we're in terms of the workplace, because we felt it was important to get that kind of feedback. And we're going to summarize the results from all of the organizations that responded. There were almost 100 that administered the survey as lessons learned, because we really think this new way of working, especially remote working, it's not just a short-term solution to an emergency, even though it is that. We think it's the beginning of a larger evolution that is going to result in a much higher percentage of employees working remotely. And we'll see if that happens, but that's the kind of feedback we're receiving. So the 28 questions, we asked people to self-identify as either essential, that means they still report to work. That doesn't mean others are not essential, but that's the terminology that's being used, or remote. And then based on how the employee self-identified, they answered slightly different questions. We administered the survey over a roughly 3-week period in May, and you see we had a pretty good response rate, 214 responded. I'm not going to share with you all of the results, but just some of the highlights. So we asked about communication. Has it been helpful? Communication from leaders, and you see the percent disagree and agree. It was on a 5-point scale, so the difference between the sum of disagree and agree with the people who answered a 3 right in the middle. So 73% agreed that communication from leadership has been helpful, a little less from managers and supervisors, and just about the same from team members. Slightly higher percentage of disagree, 17%, about communication from the manager or supervisor. And when we do surveys, one of the things we say is the surveys will tell you what people think, but not necessarily why they think what they think. So a colleague of mine likes to say that sometimes surveys will raise more questions than they answer. So there may be some things in this survey that you might want to drill down a little bit deeper on. Most useful communication, we asked you and employees across the county to identify the top 2. So that's why the number of responses is so much larger. So 77% identified email communication as one of the top 2. You know, it's convenient, and most people feel it's been effective. But we always caution managers, leaders, not just to rely on email. That this is truly all of the above kind of situation. So video, almost half people felt that whatever it is, Zoom or Skype, are working. And then you see a much lesser percentage, although, you know, significant voice, text, video, one-on-one, and website and intranet. We also asked a question about the extent to which employees felt like the organization has adapted and they can understand. So 75% said the county has done a good job adapting to work changes and recognizing that a lot of these work changes had to occur literally almost overnight. 75% said they understand the COVID-19 policies, and a lower percentage, 20%, disagree that they understand health resources and benefits around things like wellness. So you might want to maybe do a little more research on that. Again, the survey separated between employees who self-identified as essential, continuing to report to work, excuse me, and those who identified as remote. We asked, how do you feel about your status for those who self-identified? 61%, 6 out of 10, positive. Pretty big group in the middle, though, 28%. You don't see that, but those are the folks who I said, not agreeing or disagree. I have equipment supplies to protect myself, 78% positive. Maintain adequate physical distance, 75% positive. So, you know, a large majority agreeing, but a substantial minority disagreeing. And this is a word cloud. This is simply, we asked the question, how are you doing? Give us 3 words to characterize how you are feeling as an essential employee. And this is simply the number of times people identified these responses. So tired is the word that appeared most. Stressed and anxious were next, and so on. So fine was, quite a few people identified fine, but clearly in this circumstance, and of course it's completely understandable, this is a crazy time for us. Overnight, people are having their work situations have been disrupted and dislocated. And keep in mind, this was before what has occurred over the last week or so. So if we ask this question today, we might get even more dramatic responses. But I think people are, at least these respondents are feeling tired. These are the people who are still reporting to their work sites. Remote employees, there were fewer who responded, 61. How do you feel about working from home? People feel pretty good about working from home. 84% positive, only 8% negative. I have the tools and technology that I need, 92%. So you have clearly done a good job with these 61 employees, giving them what they need to operate remotely. I've talked to people in other organizations where employees have had to carry home their desktop computers because they didn't have laptops, or they're buying hundreds of laptops, or people are complaining that they don't have adequate data plans and they can't connect remotely. So people are feeling pretty good about the ability or your ability as a county to give them the tools and technology they need. And 75% say the environment allows me to focus on their job. So even though they may have kids at home, they may have lawnmowers and all kinds of disruptions, they're feeling pretty good about it. These are how the remote employees are feeling. Again, this is a word cloud simply based on the number of times these words appeared as a result of the question, give us 3 words to describe how you're feeling. So similar in many respects to what we saw earlier, anxious, stressed, but look at that, grateful. Large number of employees identified grateful and good, even great. So I think this relates to the county's ability to give them the tools that they need to work successfully at home, and the fact that they feel like they're able to operate successfully at home. So this is those folks who work remotely, 39 of them responded. When I can return to work, what do I want to do? And you can see 69% want to work remotely part of the time. These are people who don't normally work remotely. 15% want to work remotely all the time. So 3 out of 4 employees are saying, when I can return back to work, I don't want to go back to my work site all the time. And we're seeing this across the organizations that we have surveyed. And there's a lot of discussion in the practitioner literature about employees are saying, there was some adapting that I had to do, but this isn't so bad. I can do this. I like it, especially when the kids go back to school or go back to daycare. I want to do this. 7 out of 10 of the respondents said part of the time. Only 39 responses, so it's a small number, but still, I think pretty meaningful. So I want to summarize some key takeaways in general, particularly around employee engagement, but also relating to the current work environment. Because as I've mentioned a couple of times, it's more important than ever that we take great pains to maintain engagement when we can't see our employees, when they're in a different and often difficult work environment, when they may not know what's going on, when communication is difficult. So the rules that apply for employee engagement in general probably apply even more so in the current situation. So we need to continue to understand that employee engagement is about performance. To the extent that we can make employees feel good about their connection to the organization, about their leaders, their supervisors, their resources, their team members, the culture of the organization, to the extent that we can create that kind of environment. And it's really a win-win. The organization performs better because people feel better about the organization. So it is fundamentally about performance. It's about that connection People feel good about the work that they do, their contributions. They feel good about what the organization is achieving. And as I mentioned right now, for many of the folks in our communities, government is their lifeline, whether it's protecting the community or providing services, depending more than ever on government. Should be measured and results acted on. I know I'm preaching to the converted because you're doing that. And then long-term improvement requires a culture of engagement. We talked about what that means, what the characteristics are of a culture of engagement. So I'm going to invite questions, but before I do that, I mentioned that I have an anecdote, and it's from the private sector. I always hesitate to use private sector anecdotes in the public sector, but I think this one really works. So it's about Delta Airlines, and the airline industry is in tough shape right now. I used to travel a lot. I haven't traveled in the past few months. I'm not sure when I'll travel again, but when I do travel, I usually fly on Delta, and I know all of us have our airline stories, right? I mean, I've had the privilege of sleeping in the Detroit airport twice. I know that's everyone's dream, and I got to live it, but I get pretty good service from Delta. So to digress for a moment, I'm listening to an NPR radio program, Marketplace, and if we were there in person, I'd ask people to raise their hands about whether or not they know the program. I'm listening to it this night, and the host at the end of the show often has a CEO on. He interviews him. So during the show, he has the Delta CEO on, and this was a rough time. The CEO was new. This was a few weeks after Delta had that huge IT failure, had to ground all of its airplanes. The guy said it was the worst night of his life. I woke him up at 3 a.m. in the morning, and they said, "Ed, we have a problem." So at the end of this Marketplace segment, I think it's called the Corner Office, at the end of the interview, the host asks the CEOs to describe in 5 words or less what their job is. And so he asked this Delta CEO, and he says these CEOs can never do it. They always stutter and stammer, and they go on for paragraphs. So before I tell you what he said, I want to explain. When you walk on a Delta airplane, on the fuselage are 12 placards proclaiming that Delta has been selected as the best place to work by 12 different organizations. And Delta, hashtag Delta Proud, is very proud of that. So the host, Kai Risdale, asks the Delta CEO at the end of this interview, describe in 5 words or less what you think a job is. The CEO immediately says, "My job, take care of our people," all 80,000 of them. 5 words or less immediately. And I think the reason that Delta has won all these awards and is at the top of all of these great places to work lists is that the CEO believes that his number one job is to take care of his people. And he has tried very hard, despite this economic disaster. He's spent billions of dollars to keep Delta employees on the payroll. Of course, I think they're at the end of the line. But like I said, I think the reason that Delta has been designated as the best place to work by all these organizations, the CEO believes that his number one responsibility is to take care of our people. And I think if more public sector leaders believe that that was their number one responsibility, the level of engagement across the entire public sector would be even higher. So we have some time. I'm happy to answer any questions. If you could include them in the chat box. I'm monitoring the chat box. I'm looking to the side because that's where my chat box is. And I am happy to answer any questions that you may have. And I appreciate your time and attention. Usually I do this in person. Okay. So I've got one. This is a long one. This is a chicken and egg question. How does your survey account for the individual level of happiness, life satisfaction? So this person goes on to say, we often look at data from engaged employees tend to report higher levels of satisfaction in life. Is it the chicken or the egg? So in other words, which way does the arrow point? Are employees engaged because they feel good in general, or does engagement drive their overall satisfaction? And I think it's a two-way street, but I think there's a lot of research. I know there's a lot of research that shows how important how we feel at work is for our overall life satisfaction. And I know in my career, when I have had rough times at work, it's been very hard for me not to bring that home to my family. And so I think if we can create the environment, we can't do this 100%. I'm yet to come across an organization that's 100% level of engagement, although we have had some clients in the 90s. If we can create that environment for people to feel good about the work that they do, and therefore help them in their overall life satisfaction. We know there are other factors, some that we can't influence necessarily their social life or their personal faith lives, but we can make a contribution by creating the opportunity for people to feel good about their work that will affect their satisfaction in their overall life. So it feels like having strong leadership that values and prioritizes employee engagement is important. What level of engagement from lower level employees do you recommend in the recruitment and hiring of upper management? So what level of engagement from lower level? In other words, to be involved. I mentioned that example before from the United Kingdom where employees were in the back of the room and they were seeing how the candidates were responding to employee engagement survey. I think that's a very effective approach. At the university, and many universities in higher education, when we hire someone, including me, when I was hired, I had to make a series of presentations to different stakeholder groups on campus, and then leadership got feedback from those folks, and that was a part of the assessment process. So I think rank and file frontline employees, can be involved. I'm not suggesting that we turn over decisions about who should be hired to rank and file employees, but I think it is important to get some feedback where it's possible. We can't do that every time we hire somebody, but to get some feedback and include that in the process. So I hope that is responding to the question. Another point I want to make that I don't think I did, and then I will answer the next question, is when a leader, manager, or supervisor is her or himself engaged, it's 3 times more likely that the people who report to that leader are also going to be engaged. So of course, people take cues from their leaders with respect to how they behave and how they model behavior. And in our current work environment, that puts even more responsibility on managers and supervisors to be visible and to communicate. And one way to do that, of course, is to use communication platforms like Zoom and Skype and some of the other platforms. I guess everybody in the country is using Zoom right now to have that face-to-face communication. Email, 77%, I think, of the employees who responded to your survey said that they felt email is useful, but and telephone is useful, but it's hard to have difficult or nuanced conversations through email or telephone. It's important to have that face-to-face communication, even if it's electronic. So the next question, do you feel that making these surveys mandatory rather than suggestion would change some of the numbers? Some seems like what I observe, only engaged folks complete it. This often comes up when we do a survey. And the question is, who are the people who aren't responding? Are they the people who are disengaged and disaffected? And I don't have any research that conclusively answers that question. It could be hypothetically people who are highly engaged, but they're so busy doing their work that the survey kind of goes over their head. But that's why we really work to drive a high response rate with a lot of communication from us as the third party, as well as from the client. We can say one thing, we can say it 10 times, but if the client says it once, if the leader says it once, that's as good as us saying 10 times. And also the guarantee of confidentiality or anonymity so that people do feel comfortable. And I'll give you another anecdote. When we did the first survey at University of Wisconsin, campus-wide, we had a 51% response rate. Second time we did it, we had an 85% response rate. And there were a number of factors that contributed to that. But one of them was employees the first time around, some of them were not exactly sure that their results would be confidential. But when they realized that there weren't going to be any repercussions, they were much more likely to complete the survey the next time. So that drove the response rate. And we've gotten response rates of close to 100%. Now, as far as making the survey mandatory, I don't really know how you can do that and still maintain confidentiality. We've been asked that, and we never agree to any kind of process to make surveys mandatory. Sometimes we're asked by our clients, give us a list of employees who haven't responded, and we'll make them respond. I don't know how you can make employees respond. And if you make employees respond, I'm not sure you're going to want to know what the responses are. So we think a better approach is communication, guarantee of confidentiality, transparency, making sure that the organization shares with employees what it's doing to act on the results, because that's going to drive the response rate the next time. Employees believe that something is happening as a result of their responses, then they're going to be much more likely to respond the next time. So we very closely look at response rates over time. Let's see, I'm going back on the questions. I think I've hit most of them. One question that I haven't seen here, but that I often get is, how do we get our managers and supervisors on board? How do we get them to understand that this stuff is important, that it's not just another touchy-feely thing, that it's not an HR thing that they can just ignore, that it's really about organizational performance? I often get that from HR people because they tell me, say, Bob, I really get it. I understand why this stuff is important. But when I go to senior leadership, when I go to my person I report to, I can't convince them that we need to focus on this. I can't convince them that this is important, that we need to devote resources. And with all that's going on right now, particularly COVID-19 and the concerns about tax revenues and how local governments in particular are going to respond, I think it's even going to be more of an important question. My answer to that is, you have to make the business case. You have to convince not just senior leaders, who in your case already convinced because they're doing it, frontline managers and supervisors, that we need to focus on this. It is important. It's going to make a difference. It's going to help us perform and operate better. It's going to make a difference to our people in our communities that we serve. The business case, not something that's an extra, but something that is and should be integral, that when employees feel engaged, they're going to perform better. We're going to have higher levels of retention, performance, and productivity. Therefore, our organizational unit is going to operate better. So any other questions? We're getting up. We got a few more minutes. I know we have a hard stop at the top of the hour, but if there are any other questions, I'm happy to answer them. We will make this slide deck available. We are recording it so that there are folks who are unable to make it today. They can listen to the recording and see the slide deck. And I'm happy to answer any additional questions offline that may come up, have additional conversations, anything we can do to help you continue to move down the road to improved employee engagement. We're happy to do, and I would love to do. We are committed at the Institute. We are all engagement all the time. We're committed to helping the public sector because we believe in government, measure and improve engagement. So this is a good question that just came in. How can multiple stakeholders, including multiple bargaining units, collectively agree to unite. There are conflicting interests. One of the things that I focus on in my book is precisely what this person asked about. Multiple stakeholders that we have to deal with in government who often have different and conflicting interests. So how do we thread that needle? And again, I don't have a magic answer to this question, but I think it's about reaching consensus on the fundamental mission of the organization. How can we best deliver consistently high quality services to the people in our community? I think we can all agree on the ends while we may disagree on the means. And I've been involved in collective bargaining in my career, interest-based bargaining, those kinds of things. So there are strategies and approaches, and I'm not suggesting as a solution to you, but it's really about making sure that we bring people together and understand what our fundamental mission is, to make sure that we are adding value to the community, to the people that we serve. And as I tried to briefly describe earlier, with some quotes and some examples, I can't think of organizations that have a bigger impact on their communities than local government. So I don't have a quick or easy answer to that, but it's really about bringing people together and having discussions, understanding the value of engagement, understanding connecting the dots between the work and the mission, and trying to reach agreement on not just the ends, but also the means. So we have a couple of minutes left. I know, Joe, I think you wanted to make some closing remarks. As I said, I'm happy to do anything I can to help you move down the road to improve engagement. I hope what you saw and heard today is helpful. I know I threw a lot of content at you, but you will have the opportunity to review the slide deck and also listen to it again if you want to, and we'll continue to be at your service. So thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you today and for your time and attention.
Bob, thank you. This is Joe Kirby, Benton County Administrator. Wanted to extend my thanks to CPS HR and yourself for meeting with us today. It's unfortunate that we weren't able to have you here in person. Hopefully at some point in the future, we will have another opportunity to continue to engage in the discussion surrounding employee engagement. There really are three things that I would like to end on and ask everyone to consider. And number one for me is employee engagement matters. Bob talked about a number of reasons why, but for me, I really do believe it through and through that employee engagement matters. Number two, which Bob didn't talk a lot about, but I'd like to underscore, is that employee engagement is a team sport. Okay? This isn't just about myself or managers. It's about myself, managers, supervisors, employees throughout the organization, partnering together to engage in making this a better workplace so that we can improve our services ultimately to our communities. So I believe that employee engagement's a team sport. And lastly, I do believe that employee engagement is a aspiration for us culturally speaking as to how do we really embody that in our culture each and every day. So I would end on the note that developing a culture of connections is really critical. I think that's exceptionally difficult when we're in county government because we have so many disparate types of services that we have to offer that I think at times it's hard for departments to see how they can connect with one another or how they can interact with one another because their goals are so disparate. But those are my commitments: is employee engagement matters, employee engagement is a team sport, and employee engagement, aspiring to that being part of our core culture, in my mind, is critical. So on that note, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today, taking out 2 hours of your day. And as Bob has indicated, in this day and age regarding the pandemic we're all experiencing, and with so many people working from home, the connections do matter, and engagement does matter ever more so as we all begin to hopefully come out of isolation and more so back into the mainstream of things. So Thanks for your time and attention today. And Bob, my hat's off to you. And great book, by the way.
Thanks very much, Joe. It's my pleasure today.
Take care.